What does the science say about building muscle while burning fat?
So there's no question in my mind that you can do what's called a recount, where you're losing fat while gaining muscle. Now, the extent to which you can do this is going to be predicated on.
Can we begin by talking at the outset about why muscles are important to literally everybody, regardless of age, of sex, or whether you're a bodybuilder or not?
Yeah, so beyond the obvious aesthetic component, where you have more muscle, generally you look better, um, the acquisition of muscle mass is so important for health and function. So we know obviously strength is related to muscle mass, muscle power. As you get older, there is a progressive loss of muscle mass if you're not involved in resistance training. And that leads to generally a loss not only of strength, but of power, which is related to strength. And that's the ability to generate force in a very a rapid period of time. So it's the rapid production of force. And that is associated with falls, hip fractures, the falls in the elderly can be extremely serious. But it goes well beyond that. So your muscles actually are involved, they're secretory organs, and they actually secrete what are called myokines. There are substances within muscle that are beneficial. They counteract inflammatory responses in the body, chronic inflammation. The muscles are a source of glucose, of glycogen storage. And if you lose muscle, you have less capacity to store glycogen. And of course, then you're going to be more susceptible to metabolic disorders. So it just goes on and on. There's postural issues where you start to a lack of muscle or loss of muscle will cause you to have a stoop posture because you're not able to support yourself upright as well as you could. There's mental, again, the secretory effects are related to mental function as well. So virtually every organ system is affected through your muscles in some capacity.
If we can take a look at the science of muscle growth, can you explain the process of the term that I come across all the time, this muscle hypertrophy? Can we explain what that means in simple terms and what actually happens in our muscles when we apply pressure to them or exert them?
Yeah, hypertrophy in simple terms is growth, is the increase in size of muscle. And hypertrophy can be specific to any tissue. You can have cardiac hypertrophy, the heart muscle. But you can have hypertrophy of the liver, of the spleen. But in general terms, obviously those often will be negative ramifications, particularly if it's your like your liver and spleen, you don't want them to hypertrophy. But muscles, there's obviously very beneficial effects, as just said, for muscle growth. And yeah, when you so the reason that muscles grow is because it's a survival response. Basically, the body cares about one thing: survival. Cares about making it to the next minute, the next day, the next week, the next year, and it will do what it will adapt in whatever way it can to continue to survive. And if it feels there is a threat to its survival, it will cause a reaction that generally will cause some adaptive response if the body is functioning properly. And with muscles, if they are challenged beyond their present capacity, the body responds by increasing the neural effects, which are specifically related to strength, and hypertrophy, which also, as I mentioned, has a relationship to strength.
And people will be familiar with and often discouraged by the soreness or that delayed onset muscle soreness that they experience after physically exerting themselves, especially if they haven't done anything in quite a long time. Can you talk to us about how that is counterintuitively a good thing to experience in the body, and then the relationship between this soreness and the hypertrophy that we just spoke about?
Yeah, so there's some misperceptions about this. So, first of all, soreness generally is related to structural damage to tissue. Not only, I don't know how deep you want to get into it, but it's not only the muscles, but it's the surrounding connective tissue called the extracellular matrix of the muscles, which also can get damaged. There can be perturbations of the tissue, and that increases susceptibility for the nerve endings to be exposed to various substances within the body that are sent to repair the tissue, and that causes the soreness. That is a function of the novelty of the exercise, so the novelty of the stimulus. So when you're not used to a stimulus, the body again, there will be muscle damage associated with that if you're exceeding a certain level of exertion. Um, Whether that is beneficial or not to hypertrophy is still somewhat not clear. There is some evidence it may have effects. There's other evidence that the effects might not be what they thought they were. I think that is a topic that still needs more clarification. But what I would say is that too much soreness certainly is detrimental. You do not want to be walking out of the gym or going to trying to walk the next day where you basically can't move well, or you can't wash your hair. And I actually experienced that. First time I trained, I literally could not wash my hair. It was, just obviously I way overdid it. So the goal should be to try to induce mild soreness, if you will, mild damage. And the good news is that if you keep performing resistance training, your body will adapt to that. There's something called the repeated bout effect, which is when you consistently subject your muscles to a overload stimulus, it gets used to that stimulus. It no longer is a threat to its survival. There is consequently less damage. The body knows how to deal with the stress, and there is less soreness. So sometimes, depending on how you train, there can be no soreness. And if you keep doing the same routine over and over again for weeks on end, you will not generally not experience soreness.
Talking specifically on training, does training volume and frequency really depend on your goals and the outcome that you want to see?
Yeah, most definitely. I would say without question, you can make, or let's see, most people can make very good gains with very minimalist type of training routines. So spending, an hour a week, even 2 to 3 half-hour sessions, 20 minute to half-hour sessions in the gym can get you can get most people very good gains. Now, some people, there's differences in responses. So there is inter-individual response, and some people do need, just to make basic gains, some more volume. And there's a certain minimal amount of frequency. I would say 2 days a week would be a bare minimum of times of training per week, if not three. But then if your goals are more lofty, if you want to be a bodybuilder, there's well documented what's called dose response relationship of training, which indicates that higher levels of volume, at least up to a certain point, will enhance muscle growth. And to achieve the higher levels of volume, generally you're going to need to train more frequently because you can't pack all that volume into a single session. You'd be training 3 hours in the gym, which is counterproductive. By the time you're after about an hour of really hard training, if you're training, packing volume in, your focus is just not going to be where it should be. And your level of effort. So there's going to be fatigue that sets in, and you're not going to reap the same rewards from that exercise that you would if you spread it out.
Given your experience as an exercise scientist and your background an award-winning bodybuilder down through the years also, what would you say is the one kind of unified mistake that people tend to make, especially if they're coming into this world of resistance training, albeit from just a casual or an amateur perspective? What would that one mistake that you've seen that people make be?
Well, if you're talking the general public who goes to train, my impression would be, or my what I've seen in the gym, and certainly I was a personal trainer for many years, is that most people simply don't train hard enough. The number one important factor in getting results is training with a sufficient level of intensity of effort. So training hard enough to create a need for the body to think there's a survival, that it's a threat to its survival. Now, what that level is somewhat unclear. And I think also, again, most of these are an it depends type of answer, will somewhat depend on your level of expertise, of experience. So a newbie who's just coming into the gym can train with less effort because it's a novel response. Just doing anything is a novel response. And I think at the beginning, you should err on the side of training less hard. But after several weeks of training, when your body starts getting used to it, you need to start training harder. And that, well, I think the majority of evidence now indicates you don't need to train to failure, meaning the point where you can't complete another repetition in a set. you need to train pretty close to it. Probably you need to be within a couple of reps short of failure to maximize your gains. And the further away you start getting from that, the less uh, the less results you're going to get, the less impetus that there is for your body to continue to make gains. And I would say many people in the gym, if not most, are training far too mm, unintensively, if you will, to really see any appreciable gains. Which is why when I go to the gym, I see people who've been training for many years and they never change their body never really changes.
They're probably too busy looking at their smartphones, which is a bugbear of mine. I tend to see this an awful lot when I go to the gym. And I think the gym is the last place really to bring a smartphone. I just want to ask you in relation to a term, time under tension. It's something that I've heard and read a lot about in recent times, essentially, where you elongate the period under which the muscle is under tension.
Research is somewhat limited on the topic, but what I would say is I think there is the claims that there is some ideal quote unquote time under tension for a given set is not only largely overstated, it's not based on any hard evidence we have. So, I mean, I've heard there's been people who've made claims that like 40 to 60 seconds is quote unquote your ideal time under tension for a set, that so such should last somewhere between 40 to 60 seconds. And there's zero evidence that that is the case. I do think there is some preliminary evidence, including my doctoral dissertation actually did a look at this, where there's a time under tension for a session, like muscles, if you add up, so you can have more shorter durations sets, but then you'd have to do more volume. So I'll give you, for instance, my dissertation looked at a powerlifting routine, which or it approximated a powerlifting routine, which was three sets. I'm sorry, three reps uh, which take about 10 seconds to do, 8 to 10 seconds to complete 3 reps. But you're using very heavy loads. So this is to failure. Very close to failure. Versus a bodybuilding style routine, which was 10 reps. So those are somewhat arbitrary numbers, but they approximate the way bodybuilders and powerlifters train. So powerlifters train with very heavy loads for fewer repetitions. Bodybuilders generally train with more repetitions for higher times under tension. So that lasts like 30 to 40 seconds. And we did a volume load equated where the total amount of weight lifted during the session was equated, which meant that you had to do more sets for the three repetition set, the powerlifting set. There was no difference in hypertrophy at the end. So it was 7 sets of 3 versus 3 sets of 10. Powerlifting did 7 sets of 3 reps with heavy loads, whereas the bodybuilding did 3 sets of 10 with somewhat lighter loads. And they both had some more hypertrophy at the end of the routine, the end of the study, which would indicate that it's the total time under tension. So if you added up the time under tension for both of those routines, they were approximately equal. But they use very different ways to get there.
What does the science say about building muscle while burning fat? It's a question that's no doubt you've been asked many times down through the years. But first of all, is it possible? And then how so, if it is?
Yeah, there's no question in my mind that you can do what's called a recomp, where you're losing fat while gaining muscle. Now, the extent to which you can do this is going to be predicated on several factors. Number one, your starting body fat level. The higher your initial body fat level, the easier it is to lose body fat while gaining muscle. Number two is your training experience. If you are very new to training, you're going to be able to gain muscle while you're losing fat more readily than someone who's been training for longer periods of time. And number three is the 600-pound gorilla in the room, as we say in the US, the expression that it's the use of performance enhancing drugs. So if you're using steroids and other performance enhancing drugs, you can accelerate recomposition. Now, I will say this, as you start getting lower in body fat levels and also getting more experience, the harder it is to recomp. And generally speaking, you're not going to be able to maximize your gains. So if you want to maximize muscular gains, you're not going to do it while losing substantial amounts of fat. You need to focus on the focus needs to be on one or the other.
Just to clarify there, I know you were a natural bodybuilder and you're not advocating for people taking performance enhancing drugs. I know you're just saying that in order to clarify the answer to my question.
Yeah,
Just
that's there are look, yeah, we live in the real world that people are doing this. I've never, I would go on record as saying I've never taken them, but I don't care. People do what they want to do. So if someone is doing that and they're listening to this show, then it does make it easier. And there's certainly, obviously, there are detriments to doing that. So I think that's beyond the scope of this talk.
I see people often online engaging in body weight exercises or calisthenics and versions of. Is this something that you would recommend, especially if people don't have access to a gym?
Well, you can, it's certainly a viable form of muscle and body weight movements. Now, it can be somewhat more difficult to achieve, to train with the level of effort required to continue to make gains, and there's limitations. There's certain ways you can manipulate your body to make exercises harder or easier, but it can be somewhat challenging to do so in a way that you can if you have access to weights, resistance, either cables or machines or free weights. But yeah, no question that it's a viable method of training. You certainly can build muscle, particularly in the earlier phases of training.
If I had to put you under pressure and I asked you which would you rather, free weight exercises or machine based exercises, which would you prefer?
Neither nor. I don't think. I think this is an argument that's kind of futile. I think they both have advantages and disadvantages. And what I would say is, if you have access to both, use both. That there are certain complementary factors that conceivably would make them synergistic by combining their use in routines. For instance, machines can help you to target muscles more easily depending on the exercise and what you're looking to do than free weights. Free weights tend to work more musculature. They tend to allow various stabilizer muscles to work more readily. And again, there's expediency with machines where some, especially pin selectorized machines, you could just put a pin in and get a faster workout. So again, it would depend upon what your goals are, and if your goals are maximizing muscle development, then I would say the combination of both generally is going to be your best bet.
Can we talk briefly and specifically about strength training for women, why this is crucial, especially as women age?
Yeah, excellent question, and it particularly hits women hardest as far as bone loss. So resistance training not only um, has extreme benefits to the muscle tissue, but it also has a lot of benefits to enhancing bone health. And as we age, there's generally going to be a loss of bone unless you are resistance training, and it hits women hardest. Women, the last stats I've seen, like more than three quarters of the cases of osteoporosis, which is a hollowing out of the bone to a point where, I mean, someone with severe osteoporosis, if they hug someone, they can break a bone. They can cough. There's been instances of coughing and breaking the bone. So that's obviously a very severe case, but it hastens the onset of fractures, etc. And women, like I said, make up the majority of cases because women, number one, start out with less bone. They generally have smaller bone structures. And number two, estrogen, which is the primary female anabolic hormone, has a greater effect on bone development than testosterone, which is the primary anabolic hormone for men, does on bone. So when estrogen is lost during menopause, and women go through menopause in their late 40s, early 50s in general, you see a severe loss of bone in women. And so after menopause, uh, women tend to have much greater issues with bone health. And there's other, obviously, women start out with less muscle in general. So there's other factors as well. But purely from a bone perspective, if you resistance train, you can stave off bone loss. You can somewhat reverse it even after menopause. So extremely important for, I would say, more important for women than men. It's important for everyone, but women have an special advantage for a reason to lift weights or resist. Shouldn't even say lift weights, but resistance training. As we talked about, that can involve different forms of resistance.
You alluded to this in a recent Instagram post, but could you give me your take on how much protein the average adult should be taking, or is there a minimum we should be taking each day?
Yeah, if you're resistance training, and hopefully after this talk, everyone will understand you should. I would say a minimum is probably somewhere around 1.6 grams per kilogram of body mass. And when we talk about our body weight, when we talk about body weight, it's your what would be considered a lean body weight, which would be somewhere around 12% for men and 20% or so for women. So if you are overweight or certainly obese, you don't factor in the extra body fat. That has no bearing on how much protein you should take. It. So you want to, base gauge this on what your lean weight would be. And like I said, somewhere at 1.6 grams per kilogram. And my general recommendation, if you're a bodybuilder or someone that wants to maximize muscle building, somewhat more than that, probably closer to 2 grams per kilogram.
I recently spoke with a Professor Richard Kreider from Texas A&M University about creatine supplementation, and he spoke glowingly of it, not just in relation to building of muscle, but in other areas of health also. I just would like to hear your thoughts on creatine supplementation.
Yeah, and Rick is one of the foremost researchers on the topic, so a lot of respect for him. Yeah, so creatine, it depends. Some of that is outside of my general realm of expertise, like brain. I've read some work where it's involved in brain health and other, excuse me, other health related matters, and I just have not. That's kind of not my area of expertise. But from a strength and hypertrophy standpoint, it is really certainly the most studied supplement on muscle building and strength and the most efficacious, the one that's shown to have the most beneficial effects. It is not a magic muscle builder. The amount of gains that you get is relatively modest. So it can certainly help to build muscle. It is more beneficial for those who are vegans. So creatine is naturally occurring in meat-based products. Those who eat more meat generally are going to have higher initial creatine stores. So the additive benefit of taking supplemental creatine will be less, and vice versa. There's someone who does not take in meat generally is going to have lower creatine stores. But what I would say is that people should try it and see if it works for them. You have to temper your expectations. Expectations, they're not what some of the supplement companies promote, like it's some magical muscle building supplement. But I do think that of all the supplements out there, it is the one that has the greatest efficacy.
And just on supplements, then, what are your thoughts on the plethora of protein supplements out there? Because you have everything from casein to whey protein isolate and everything else in between. So, what are your thoughts on this? Because people do rely on protein supplementation in order to boost their protein intake per day, especially from a convenience standpoint, because it's not always possible to ingest a breast or chicken or whatever it is.
So that would be my exact comment to you. If you're able to get your daily protein requirements from Whole Foods, probably that's the best, in my humble opinion, the best way to go about it. But if you're not able to meet your needs, this can be particularly important for elderly individuals. They lose their sensation of taste. And as you get older, taste sensation tends to go down. And I would say that not only that, there's also what's called anabolic insensitivity, where they need generally higher dosage per meal to enhance the anabolic functions. And I think it can benefit them. But to me, it's a secondary option if you're not able to achieve your needs through foods. And certainly you need to get your protein in. And then I would say that protein supplements are viable. They're not again, not magic muscle builders, and if you're taking in more protein than your body needs, it's just gonna get utilized for it's gonna be oxidized for energy, so, uh, it's not gonna help you to load up on extra protein.
Well, some great advice there. Get out there and start resistance training and make sure you up your protein intake per day. The book again is called The Max Muscle Plan with lots of exercises and plans in there for you to feast your eyes on. What I'll do is I'll pop a link to that book in the show notes for this episode. But for the moment, Professor Brad Schoenfeld, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed that video, I know you'll get some value from this video right here.